What if everything you believed about being too old to keep up with the world was wrong? Margaret sat on the worn wooden bench outside her farmhouse, the early morning sun casting a golden glow over the endless fields of Nebraska. Her fingers trembled slightly as she tapped her slow, buffering laptop screen. The spinning wheel of doom, the dreaded symbol of a connection too weak, too unreliable, mocked her efforts to video chat with her granddaughter. "Grandma, can you hear me?" The faint, pixelated voice filtered through the crackling speakers, barely audible. Margaret's heart sank. Just moments ago, she had imagined hearing laughter, seeing that bright smile she'd missed for months. But instead, she faced frozen images and broken words. Her eyes welled up with tears, but she blinked them away. "One more try," she whispered. For years, this house, her sanctuary, had been isolated by more than just physical distance. The unreliable internet was a modern barrier she couldn't break. Her son's advice echoed in her mind, "Mom, maybe it's time to accept it. You're not a kid anymore. Slow down." Those words stung, felt like a gentle but firm closing of a door she wasn't ready to shut. What if the digital world had simply moved on without her? What if she was destined to watch life pass by through a foggy window, disconnected and alone? Then a news alert caught her eye, a headline flashing across her cracked phone screen: Elon Musk Starlink promises to bring high-speed internet to the most remote places. Elon Musk, the man who sent rockets to Mars, the visionary entrepreneur who dared to dream bigger than anyone else. She'd heard of him before, of course. But could this space-age technology really reach her small town, her isolated home? Could it change everything? The question clawed at her heart with a mix of hope and skepticism. Could she be wrong about her place in this rapidly changing world? Could she learn, adapt, and reconnect? As the sun rose higher, Margaret felt something shift inside her, a faint spark of determination, a whisper of possibility. What if this was the moment it all changed? The moment she stopped fading into the background and stepped back into the light. "Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from," she imagined saying, as if speaking directly to thousands like herself. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The question echoed in her mind, a challenge to herself as much as to anyone else feeling forgotten. Margaret closed her laptop and stood, the creak of the floorboards beneath her feet a steady reminder of time's passage. But today, for the first time in a long while, she felt the pull of something new. Maybe it was Elon's Starlink. Maybe it was her own courage. Or maybe it was simply the undeniable truth that it was never too late to reach for a new beginning. Margaret had lived most of her 68 years in this same small town of Cedar Creek, Nebraska, a place where everybody knew your name and your history, sometimes better than you did yourself. She was born on a farm just a few miles down the dusty country road, a second-generation Nebraskan raised on honest work, fresh air, and the endless sky. Her childhood was filled with memories of sun-drenched fields, the smell of freshly cut hay, and her father's laughter as he taught her how to drive the tractor. Those days felt like another lifetime now, a chapter from a book she occasionally pulled from the shelf but rarely opened. Her marriage to Bill, her late husband, had been the anchor of her life. They met at the county fair when she was 20, and together they raised 2 children, Sarah and Michael, with all the love and hope 2 young parents could muster. But life had a way of drifting, like the winds that swept across the plains, shifting direction without warning. The farm sold after Bill's passing 5 years ago, and with it went many of the routines and rhythms that had kept Margaret tethered. The house, once filled with laughter and the smell of fresh-baked bread, now echoed with silence. Days slipped by with little more than the hum of the old refrigerator and the occasional call from her son or daughter, both busy with their own lives in the city. The phone conversations had grown shorter, the visits even rarer. She had tried to bridge the distance with emails and texts, but the slow internet made even these small efforts frustrating, often futile. The loneliness settled like dust in the corners of her heart. At times, Margaret wrestled with regrets that felt heavier than the years she carried. She thought about the dreams she'd shelved along the way, the art classes she always wanted to take, the books she'd meant to write, the places she'd hoped to see. Too late now, she would tell herself quietly. But sometimes, late at night, those words felt like a cage. Her relationships bore the marks of time and distance, too. Sarah, her eldest, had been hurt by years of misunderstandings and silence, a wedge driven deep by differing views and unspoken words. Michael, her youngest, was a successful lawyer living across the country, but even he had little time for calls that dragged on due to glitchy video chats. There was a key memory Margaret held close, one that symbolized all she felt she'd lost, the afternoon, nearly 30 years ago, when Bill sat by the cracked kitchen window trying to fix the old landline phone. His hands were steady but tired, the frustration clear in his furrowed brow. The phone was their lifeline, their connection to the world beyond the fields. When it finally rang that day, it brought news that changed everything, a call from Sarah, announcing she was pregnant with their first grandchild. That moment of pure joy and hope seemed so distant now, almost like a fading photograph. Margaret's fingers traced the outline of that memory as she sat by the window, staring out at the vast horizon where sky met earth in a perfect, endless line. The house creaked with the quiet reminders of a life well lived, but one now shadowed by what felt like growing invisibility. Aging in Cedar Creek was like watching the world speed by from a stationary train, the modern age moving past without slowing down. The local cafe where she once met friends for coffee had shut down months ago, replaced by a fast food chain that no one really needed. The library was a lonely place, its shelves gathering dust as fewer residents visited. And the internet, that invisible thread connecting so many lives, was a threadbare lifeline at best, barely holding together the fragile bonds of family and community. Yet, in the midst of this quiet despair, a flicker of something else lingered, a stubborn refusal to give in. Margaret was no stranger to hard work, to weathering storms both literal and figurative. She remembered the long winters, when the snow piled high and the power would go out for days, and how her family banded together to survive. She recalled Bill's steady hands and unwavering faith in tomorrow, lessons she carried deep inside her. "I'm not done yet," she whispered to the empty room. That determination, buried beneath layers of weariness, was waiting for a spark. She found it one evening while flipping through the television channels, stumbling upon a news segment about Elon Musk and his Starlink project. The report showed satellite dishes being installed on roofs in the most remote parts of the country, places just like Cedar Creek. "Bringing the world to your doorstep," the reporter said, as images of sparkling stars and earthbound receivers filled the screen. For the first time in a long time, Margaret felt something she hadn't felt in years: hope. The idea that a man who dreamed of rockets and Mars could also care about a small town in Nebraska felt almost unreal. Could this be the answer she'd been waiting for? Could she finally break through the digital barrier that had kept her isolated? Her mind raced with questions and possibilities. What if she could video chat with Sarah and Michael without interruptions? What if she could take those art classes online? What if she could start writing again, sharing stories and memories that had been locked inside for too long? The house suddenly seemed less like a cage and more like a gateway. That night, Margaret lay awake listening to the familiar creaks of the old farmhouse, the soft rustle of wind through the trees, and the distant calls of owls. In her heart, a quiet revolution was taking place. She realized that the years she'd counted as lost were not a final chapter but merely a pause, a moment before the next big leap. "I can learn," she thought. "I can change." But with hope came doubt. What if she was too old to handle the technology? What if the neighbors laughed at her for trying? What if it didn't work? Yet, beneath those fears was a deeper truth: Elon Musk's vision challenged everything she believed about limits. Here was a man who refused to accept the impossible, who stared down failure and pushed forward anyway. If he could do it, why couldn't she? The next morning, Margaret began researching Starlink online, slowly but steadily. The jargon was confusing, the setup intimidating, but she refused to give up. She imagined the feel of that satellite dish on her roof, the hum of data flowing through invisible channels, the voices of her family coming clearly through the screen. That tiny spark of possibility grew with each click, each new piece of information. For the first time in a long time, Margaret felt alive with purpose. As she closed her laptop, a smile crept across her face, fragile but real. The life before the shift had been filled with quiet struggles and missed connections, but it was not the end. It was the moment just before everything changed. What if everything you believed about being too old was wrong? Margaret was ready to find out. Margaret sat at her kitchen table, the pale morning light filtering through yellowed curtains, casting soft shadows on the scattered papers and brochures about Starlink she'd collected over the last few days. Her hands trembled slightly as she fumbled with the pamphlet, the fine print and technical jargon twisting her mind into knots. Was this really possible? Could she, at nearly 70, learn this new language of satellites and broadband, routers and data speeds? Doubt crept in like an unwelcome guest, settling deep inside. She heard the voice of her son, Michael, clear as if he stood beside her. "Mom, maybe this is more than you need. You're pushing too hard. Why not just accept things as they are?" The words stung worse than she expected. Michael wasn't unkind, but his concern felt like a gentle dismissal of her dreams, a reminder that her time was past. "Slow down, Mom," he'd said on the last call, "let the younger generation handle this tech stuff." But slow down felt like fading away, like shrinking into shadows that grew longer with each passing day. Margaret hated that thought more than anything. The walls of the kitchen seemed to close in, the familiar scent of coffee and old wood suddenly suffocating. She asked herself again, is it too late? Does anyone care? The town around her was shrinking, its heartbeat growing faint. The grocery store closed last month, the school district consolidated with the next county over. Cedar Creek felt like a ghost of the place she once knew, a place struggling to survive in the digital age. Without reliable internet, she was cut off from telemedicine appointments, online banking, and even simple communication with loved ones. Doctors told her to take it easy, warning about stress and the risks of pushing herself. But what choice did she have? To surrender to invisibility? To give up on connection? One afternoon, feeling particularly lost, Margaret turned on the radio and caught a snippet of a podcast interviewing Elon Musk. His voice was confident, visionary, almost magnetic. "When you're pushing the boundaries of what's possible," he said, "failure isn't a stopping point, it's a step forward. If you give up because of fear or age or obstacles, you've already lost." Those words hit Margaret like a bolt of lightning. They felt like a direct message, a challenge she couldn't ignore. The man who dared to send rockets into space and bring satellites to Earth was telling her that giving up wasn't an option, not for him, not for anyone. For a moment, she felt a surge of energy, a flicker of hope. If Elon Musk could defy the odds, so could she. Yet, hope battled with fear. The next day, Margaret's doctor warned her again, "Margaret, don't push yourself too hard. Your heart isn't what it used to be." The words weighed heavily on her chest. How could she balance the need to fight for connection with the reality of her aging body? That night, alone in her bed, Margaret wrestled with the inner war raging within her. "Is it worth it?" she whispered into the darkness. "Will this change anything, or am I chasing ghosts?" The silence was deafening. Her mind spiraled through memories of past failures and missed chances, plans she never followed through on, opportunities she let slip away, friendships that faded with time. The ache of regret was real and raw. Yet intertwined with that pain was a stubborn ember refusing to die. She remembered Bill's words during his last days, urging her to keep dreaming, to never let fear cage her spirit. "You're stronger than you think," he had said softly. That strength felt distant but alive. The next morning, Margaret stepped outside and looked up at the sky. The vast expanse of blue stretched above her, dotted with the faintest glimmer of stars fading with the dawn. Somewhere beyond that sky, satellites circled the Earth, beaming signals that could bring her closer to the people she loved. She pictured a small dish on her roof, connecting her to a world no longer out of reach. The idea that she could take control, push back against the isolation, sparked a small revolution inside her. She called Sarah that afternoon, her voice trembling but determined. "I'm thinking of getting this Starlink thing," she said. "I want to try." Sarah was quiet for a moment, then surprised, then cautious. "Mom, are you sure? It's complicated, and what if it doesn't work?" Margaret smiled through the phone, despite the doubt in her voice. "I have to try, Sarah. I have to believe it can work." That evening, Margaret sat by the fireplace, scrolling through Starlink's website, reading forums of people in remote towns like hers, sharing stories of newfound connection. Each testimonial was a small victory, a beacon of hope. If they can do it, so can I, she thought. But the challenges remained real. Setting up Starlink required technical know-how, patience, and some physical effort. Neighbors whispered doubts. Space internet? Sounds like science fiction, Joe, her next-door neighbor, had sneered. Stick to the basics, Margaret. The skepticism stung, but it also fueled her resolve. This wasn't just about internet, it was about reclaiming her life. She began planning small steps, breaking the process into manageable parts, calling customer support, reading installation guides, reaching out to online communities for help. Every step was a battle against the voice inside that said, "Maybe you're too old for this." Slowly, the inner war turned into a quiet determination. Margaret realized that the fight wasn't against age or technology but against the fear of irrelevance. Elon Musk's words echoed in her mind, "Limits are often just beliefs, not realities." The night before ordering her Starlink kit, Margaret lay awake imagining the possibilities: video calls with Sarah and Michael without freezing screens, virtual art classes where she could finally paint again, online book clubs reconnecting her to the world beyond Cedar Creek. She pictured herself teaching others, neighbors gathered around her with their laptops, learning to navigate this new frontier together. The thought was intoxicating. When the package finally arrived weeks later, Margaret felt like a pioneer. She unpacked the equipment carefully, the sleek dish, the cables, the router. The instructions seemed daunting, but she was ready. As she climbed the ladder to install the dish on her roof, the wind tugged at her hair, the sun warming her back. For a moment, she looked out over the fields and felt a profound connection to the generations who had lived here before her. They had faced storms and droughts, hard winters and hard times. She was no different. She was carrying forward the legacy of resilience. That night, as she powered on the system and waited with bated breath, Margaret felt the weight of years lift slightly. The spinning icon on her laptop began to stabilize. The screen flickered. Then, for the first time in a long time, a clear image appeared, a video call with her granddaughter, smiling and waving from thousands of miles away. Tears filled Margaret's eyes. The inner war wasn't over, but this small victory was a beacon. She had dared to believe. She had dared to act. And that made all the difference. Margaret stood at the threshold of her small living room, her heart pounding with a mixture of nervousness and hope. The Starlink satellite dish gleamed on the roof under the midday sun, a silent sentinel ready to bridge the vast expanse between her isolated farmhouse and the bustling world beyond. For months, she had wrestled with doubt, frustration, and fear, but now, with the equipment installed and humming quietly, the moment of truth had arrived. She powered on her laptop and clicked the Starlink app, watching as the signal bars climbed steadily from 0 to full strength. The buffering circle that had haunted her for years was gone. Instead, crystal-clear images flickered to life on her screen. The first video call came through almost instantly. It was Sarah, her daughter, smiling warmly from a city apartment cluttered with books and plants. "Mom, I can't believe it's working," Sarah exclaimed. "I've missed this so much." Tears welled up in Margaret's eyes as she responded, "Me too, honey. Me too." That small act of connection was more than a call, it was a breakthrough, a reclaiming of something she thought she had lost forever. Inspired by Elon Musk's relentless push to redefine the impossible, Margaret realized the power of one choice, one bold step to change her world. She hadn't just upgraded her internet, she had reignited her sense of purpose. With this newfound connection, Margaret began to explore new possibilities. She signed up for virtual art classes, a dream she'd shelved for decades, and soon found herself painting again, her fingers tracing colors and shapes that told stories of her past and hopes for the future. Her brushes brought life to canvases that captured the rolling Nebraska plains, the endless sky, and the quiet strength she'd rediscovered within herself. Her story started to spread through Cedar Creek. Neighbors who once dismissed the space internet began to watch with curiosity as Margaret demonstrated video calls, shared online tutorials, and connected friends and family in ways they hadn't imagined possible. Joe, her skeptical next-door neighbor, stopped by one afternoon. "I gotta admit, Margaret, I didn't think this Starlink thing was real. But you got that grandkid of yours right there on the screen. I'm impressed." Margaret smiled, handing him her tablet. "It's never too late to try something new, Joe. You should see what else is out there." Emboldened by this growing community interest, Margaret started a blog titled Cedar Creek Connected, sharing her journey and tips for others struggling with poor internet access. Her words resonated beyond her town, attracting readers from rural areas across the country who saw in her story a reflection of their own struggles and hopes. But Margaret's transformation was not only about technology. With her connection restored, she found the courage to reach out to Sarah in a way she hadn't dared for years. Their last conversations had been strained, filled with misunderstandings and unspoken hurts. One evening, after a video call where laughter returned for the first time in ages, Margaret wrote an email to Sarah, a heartfelt letter acknowledging the past, expressing regret for the distance, and hoping to rebuild their bond. The response came slowly, then warmly, with Sarah sharing her own fears and hopes. It was a beginning. Meanwhile, Margaret's health challenges persisted. The doctor's warnings about stress and heart risks were real, but the fire inside her was stronger. She took daily walks around the farm, breathing in the crisp air, feeling her muscles strengthen. The simple act of movement, paired with the mental stimulation of learning and connecting online, began to heal more than just her body. She was becoming whole again. One afternoon, Margaret received an unexpected invitation to speak at a virtual conference focused on rural connectivity, where Elon Musk himself was a keynote speaker. The prospect terrified her, speaking in front of hundreds, maybe thousands, felt overwhelming. But the chance to share her story, to shine a light on the challenges and triumphs of rural America, was a responsibility she embraced. On the day of the conference, as Elon Musk shared his vision for a connected future, Margaret took a deep breath and shared her journey. The loneliness, the doubts, the small but bold decision to adopt Starlink and fight back against isolation. Her voice wavered at first but grew stronger with every word. She spoke not just for herself but for the countless others feeling forgotten. When she finished, the virtual room erupted in applause, a wave of support and encouragement flooding her screen. Elon Musk's reply was brief but powerful. Margaret's story shows why we push boundaries, to make sure no one is left behind. Her courage is the real game changer. That moment marked a turning point for Margaret. She wasn't just a passive recipient of technology, she was an advocate, a beacon for change in her community. Her blog expanded into workshops, helping neighbors set up their own Starlink connections and navigate the digital world. Margaret found herself energized by this new purpose, a leader who had reclaimed her voice and influence. The journey wasn't without setbacks. Some days, the signal faltered. Technical glitches tested her patience. Old fears tried to creep back in. But each challenge was met with the resilience she built over a lifetime, the same resilience Elon Musk embodied in his quest to reach the stars. In quiet moments, Margaret would look out over the fields from her porch, the Starlink dish a silent guardian above her. She felt connected, not just to her family, but to a vast network of dreamers and doers reaching beyond limits. Her story was no longer about what she had lost but what she had gained. She had taken one small step, inspired by a visionary who dared to imagine a better future, and transformed her life. "I was never too old," she often told herself now, "I was just waiting for permission to matter again." The power of one choice had broken the chains of isolation and opened the door to a new legacy. Margaret's life was changing, and with it, the promise of hope for rural America's forgotten corners. Margaret sat quietly in her living room, the soft glow of the laptop screen illuminating her face as she stared at the notifications flooding in. Her story, the journey from isolation to connection, the bold choice to install Starlink and fight back against loneliness, was going viral. Messages poured in from all across the country, strangers inspired by her courage, other rural residents struggling with poor internet, even tech enthusiasts cheering her on. For years, Margaret had felt like a forgotten voice, an invisible figure shrinking in the background of a world that sped ahead without her. Now, that silence was breaking. The wave of attention was overwhelming and beautiful. It brought calls from journalists wanting interviews, invitations to speak at community events, and even a message from Elon Musk's team congratulating her on her impact. The disbelief she'd felt when she first installed the dish had grown into a powerful momentum. It was more than just technology. It was a breakthrough of spirit. Yet amid the joy, there was vulnerability. With newfound visibility came old fears. What if she stumbled? What if her story wasn't enough? What if this second chance slipped through her fingers like the first? But then she remembered the nights spent battling doubt, the quiet resolve that had carried her through, and the words of Elon Musk echoing in her mind, "Failure is a stepping stone to success." She allowed herself to embrace the uncertainty and keep moving forward. One of the most profound moments came when Sarah, her daughter, finally agreed to visit Cedar Creek after years of distance. They stood together on the porch, the vast Nebraska sky stretching endlessly above them, and shared a long, healing embrace. The barriers built by years of silence crumbled, replaced by laughter, tears, and the rebuilding of trust. Margaret introduced Sarah to her online art community, showing her the paintings that had blossomed with every brushstroke. Sarah marveled at her mother's transformation, the way the digital world had opened new doors for both of them. Michael, too, reached out more often, video calling with his children and sharing stories of their busy lives. Margaret's days filled with renewed purpose, hosting virtual workshops, mentoring neighbors eager to learn, and chronicling the changing face of rural America. Her small farmhouse became a hub of connection, the Starlink dish a symbol of hope. There was a moment that stood out, a cold winter evening when a power outage hit Cedar Creek, plunging the town into darkness and cutting off traditional communication lines. Margaret's home, however, stayed connected thanks to Starlink's satellite network. Neighbors gathered at her house, charging phones, sharing news, and finding comfort in the warmth of community and connectivity. It was a tangible reminder that technology, when wielded with courage and vision, could be a lifeline. As spring bloomed over the fields, Margaret found herself reflecting on how far she'd come. The loneliness that once enveloped her had given way to vibrant relationships and new dreams. She wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. The world felt bigger and brighter, filled with possibility. The inner battles of fear and doubt were not gone, but they no longer held power over her. Margaret understood now that change was a process, sometimes messy and slow, but always worth the struggle. She thought about the legacy she wanted to leave, not just for her family but for her community and beyond. It was a legacy of resilience, of daring to believe in second chances, and of refusing to let age or circumstance define worth. "I was never too old," she whispered to herself one evening, "I was just waiting for permission to matter again." With Starlink's connection bridging the digital divide, Margaret saw a future where rural America could reclaim its voice and place in the world. She envisioned young people staying or returning to these small towns, entrepreneurs launching businesses online, families reconnecting across distances once thought insurmountable. Her story was a testament to the power of one choice, a small spark that could ignite a movement. And it all started with the courage to believe, inspired by a visionary who challenged limits and dared to dream beyond the stars. Margaret's journey was far from over. New challenges would come, and the road ahead would require strength and adaptability. But for the first time in a long time, she faced the future with hope, ready to write the next chapter on her own terms. Margaret sat on her porch swing, the soft hum of the Starlink dish blending with the rustle of the Nebraska wine through the tall grass. The sun was setting, painting the sky with strokes of pink and orange that seemed to promise a fresh start. She thought back to the months since her world had shifted, the doubts, the fears, the battles with isolation and self-doubt, and smiled quietly. She had come a long way from the woman who once felt invisible and forgotten. The Starlink connection had not just brought internet access to her remote farmhouse, it had rekindled her sense of purpose and belonging. Through this connection, she'd rediscovered community, rebuilt broken relationships, and reignited passions she thought had been lost to time. Margaret's transformation was more than personal, it was a testament to the potential within every person to change, regardless of age or circumstance. She was living proof that it was never too late to reclaim your story. Margaret's days now held a new rhythm, filled with meaningful work and vibrant connections. She had become a leader in Cedar Creek, helping neighbors install their own Starlink systems, teaching basic computer skills, and organizing virtual gatherings that brought people together across distances. The community that had once felt forgotten was now weaving a new tapestry of hope and resilience. Her blog, Cedar Creek Connected, had grown into a respected voice advocating for rural internet access nationwide. Emails arrived daily from people inspired by her journey, sharing their own stories of isolation and renewal. Through her writing and speaking, Margaret found a powerful way to channel her experiences into something bigger than herself. One afternoon, a letter arrived that would forever mark a turning point in Margaret's life. It was from a nonprofit organization dedicated to bridging the digital divide in rural America, inviting her to join a panel of experts and advocates working to influence policy and expand access to technology. The invitation humbled her but also ignited a fierce determination. She accepted without hesitation. The day of the panel, Margaret sat alongside tech innovators, government officials, and community leaders. She spoke candidly about the struggles she and Cedar Creek had faced. The loneliness, the missed opportunities, the fight to stay connected in a world moving too fast. But she also spoke of hope, resilience, and the transformative power of bold choices. Her words resonated deeply. Later, a congressman approached her, impressed by her authenticity and insight. "Margaret, your story highlights what many overlook. We need voices like yours to shape real change." That recognition was more than validation, it was a call to action. Margaret realized that her new legacy was not just about her own life, it was about paving the way for countless others. Inspired by Elon Musk's relentless pursuit of progress, she committed herself to advocacy, education, and community building. In her heart, she knew that technology alone wasn't the answer. It was the courage to connect, to push beyond fear, and to believe in possibility that truly transformed lives. Back home, Margaret continued to nurture her relationships with Sarah and Michael. The wounds of the past had softened, replaced by understanding and renewed love. She cherished the video calls with her grandchildren, the virtual book clubs that connected Cedar Creek's elders with young readers, and the art classes that brought color and joy to her days. These moments grounded her, reminding her that legacy was woven from love as much as from action. One crisp autumn evening, as leaves swirled around the porch, Margaret reflected on the journey she'd taken. She thought about the doubts that once held her captive, the barriers of age and technology she'd overcome, and the unexpected community that had blossomed through a simple satellite dish. She realized that what had changed was not just her internet access but her entire outlook on life. "I was never too old," she murmured, "I was just waiting for permission to matter again." That permission, she now understood, had come from within, the decision to embrace change, to fight for connection, and to believe in the value of her own story. As night fell and the stars appeared overhead, Margaret felt a deep peace. The vast sky above, once a symbol of isolation, now felt like a canvas of endless possibility. She imagined Elon Musk's words echoing in the distance, a reminder that the limits we accept are often only the ones we impose on ourselves. In that moment, Margaret knew her journey was just beginning. Her new legacy was not only in the technology she'd helped bring to her community but in the courage she'd inspired in others to rewrite their own stories. She smiled, ready for whatever came next, knowing that the fire inside her, sparked by a visionary's example and fueled by her own resolve, would never fade. Margaret sat at her kitchen table, a cup of tea warming her hands as she scrolled through old photographs on her tablet, now connected to the world in ways she never imagined. Each photo told a story, some joyful, others marked by regret and distance. One picture in particular caught her eye, a faded image of her and Sarah, years ago, laughing beneath the big oak tree in their backyard. The memories flooded back, the laughter, the dreams, the painful silence that had grown between them over time. For years, Margaret had carried the weight of that distance like a stone in her chest, convinced it was too late to mend the broken threads of family. But now, with the steady pulse of Starlink's connection bridging the miles, she felt a flicker of hope. She sent a message to Sarah, "Found this old photo today. Made me miss those days." The reply came quickly, filled with warmth and nostalgia, "Me too, Mom. Let's talk soon." That simple exchange was the beginning of something deeper. With the barriers of distance softened by technology, Margaret began reaching out to other parts of her past, old friends, neighbors, even estranged relatives, rekindling connections long thought lost. Each call, each message, was a step toward healing the loneliness that had shadowed her for so long. In the evenings, she joined virtual reunions, where voices once distant now filled her home with laughter and stories. The community of Cedar Creek, once scattered and disconnected, started to weave itself back together through the threads of digital connection. Margaret's renewed relationships brought more than companionship, they brought perspective. Conversations with friends who faced their own struggles reminded her that she was not alone in her journey. The shared stories of resilience and hope fueled her resolve to keep pushing forward. One afternoon, Margaret received an unexpected email from Henry, an old college friend she hadn't seen in decades. Henry had followed her blog and was inspired by her story. He invited her to collaborate on a project to document the lives of rural Americans navigating the digital divide. Margaret accepted eagerly, excited by the chance to give voice to those stories. Together, they began gathering interviews, photos, and experiences from communities across the heartland. Through their work, Margaret saw the common threads of fear, hope, and courage, a mosaic of lives transformed by connection. The project became a beacon for others, shining a light on the power of technology to heal not just physical distance but emotional divides. Meanwhile, her relationship with Sarah blossomed into something new. They shared virtual cooking classes, online book clubs, and even collaborated on a digital scrapbook of family memories. The barriers of time and silence began to dissolve, replaced by understanding and renewed affection. Margaret realized that technology was more than a tool, it was a bridge to reclaim the past and build a future. At the same time, Margaret's community work expanded. She organized digital literacy workshops, teaching neighbors how to use their new Starlink connections for education, business, and connection. These gatherings became celebrations of progress and unity, where laughter and learning mixed freely. The excitement was contagious, spreading through Cedar Creek like wildfire. Joe, her once skeptical neighbor, now championed the cause, sharing his own success stories of online gardening forums and small business ventures. Margaret marveled at the transformation. A town once resigned to invisibility was becoming a hub of innovation and hope. But reconnecting the past wasn't without its challenges. Old wounds surfaced in difficult conversations, and Margaret faced moments of doubt and vulnerability. She grappled with the question that had haunted her from the start: is it too late to change? Each time, she found strength in the example of Elon Musk, a man who defied odds and expectations to reinvent industries and challenge the status quo. His words echoed in her mind: when something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor. With that mindset, Margaret embraced the messy, imperfect process of healing and growth. One chilly evening, as the wind whispered through the trees, Margaret received a message from Sarah: "Mom, I'm coming home next month." The news filled her with a joy she hadn't dared to feel in years. They planned visits, shared meals, and dreamed of new memories to create. The distance that once seemed insurmountable was now a bridge to new beginnings. As the stars appeared overhead, Margaret reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The loneliness, the regret, the fear, all had shaped her, but none defined her. Through connection, courage, and the spark of a visionary's example, she had rewritten her story. The past was no longer a chain but a foundation for growth. And the future? It was wide open, filled with possibility. "I was never too old," she whispered into the night, "I was just waiting to reconnect." Margaret's life had taken a turn she never expected, but one she embraced fully. The digital age, once a realm she feared and avoided, had become a place where she flourished. The Starlink connection wasn't just a tool, it was a lifeline that illuminated new paths for her and her community. The small town of Cedar Creek, nestled among endless fields and wide-open skies, was waking up to possibilities long denied. Inspired by Elon Musk's vision of pushing boundaries, Margaret spearheaded an initiative to bring digital literacy and opportunity to every corner of the county. She partnered with the local library, schools, and community centers to host workshops, demonstrations, and one-on-one tutorials. The goal was clear: no one in Cedar Creek would be left behind in this new connected world. The workshops were modest at first, held in the cramped meeting room of the library with a handful of attendees. But word spread quickly. Farmers curious about weather apps, retirees eager to video chat with grandchildren, and young entrepreneurs ready to launch online businesses all showed up, hungry to learn. Margaret watched with pride as the hesitant faces grew confident, fingers mastering keyboards, voices growing louder with excitement. Joe, her once skeptical neighbor, became one of her most passionate students and advocates. He started a small online store selling homemade preserves, something he never imagined possible. His success became a beacon, encouraging others to try. The transformation wasn't just economic, it was deeply personal. Loneliness and isolation that had once gripped Cedar Creek began to ebb, replaced by a sense of community and shared purpose. Virtual book clubs connected elders with youth, online forums became spaces for exchanging ideas and support. Margaret's blog expanded into a multimedia platform featuring interviews, tutorials, and success stories from across the region. She was no longer just a beneficiary of technology, she was a catalyst, lighting the way for others. But the journey was not without challenges. The rural infrastructure, while improved by Starlink, still had limits. Some days the connection faltered, frustration simmered, and skepticism lingered. Margaret faced moments of doubt, wondering if the change was enough or sustainable. Yet every time uncertainty crept in, she remembered Elon Musk's relentless drive, the countless failures and near misses that preceded success. His words echoed in her mind: persistence is very important. You should not give up unless you are forced to give up. Those words steeled her resolve. Margaret reached out to local officials and technology experts, advocating for continued investment and support. She formed a coalition of rural leaders, sharing strategies and pooling resources to build a stronger, more connected future. At home, her personal life blossomed alongside her community work. Sarah's visit had rekindled a deep bond, and the two women spent hours exploring online platforms together, learning and dreaming. Michael's calls were more frequent, and family gatherings, whether virtual or in person, were filled with laughter and warmth. Margaret's art found new audiences online, with buyers from distant states appreciating the vivid landscapes that captured the spirit of rural America. One evening, as autumn leaves rustled outside her window, Margaret sat before her computer reflecting on the journey. From the depths of isolation to the heights of connection, she had traveled far. Her life was a testament to the power of one choice, a choice to embrace change, to fight fear, and to believe in possibility. She thought about the countless others still waiting for their own spark, the millions in rural America who faced barriers of distance and neglect. Her mission was clear: to light new paths, to be a guide as Elon Musk's vision had been for her. With renewed energy, Margaret drafted a proposal for a regional digital mentorship program, pairing tech-savvy youth with elders eager to learn. She envisioned a community where age was not a barrier but a bridge, a place where wisdom met innovation in a shared journey forward. The program was met with enthusiasm and quickly gained support from schools and nonprofits. Margaret saw firsthand how mentorship empowered both generations, breaking down stereotypes and fostering mutual respect. Through these connections, Cedar Creek was evolving, not just surviving but thriving. The town's story began to attract attention beyond the county line. Reporters visited to cover the grassroots revolution in rural connectivity, and Margaret found herself speaking at conferences and on podcasts, sharing her experience and advocating for change. Each appearance was a chance to amplify the voices of those often overlooked. Through it all, Margaret remained grounded. She knew the road ahead was long and winding, filled with challenges and setbacks. But she also knew that every small victory mattered, that the future was built one connection, one conversation, one courageous step at a time. And as the stars appeared in the clear Nebraska sky, she smiled, knowing she was part of something bigger. A movement to ensure that no one, no matter how far or how old, was left behind. Margaret stood at the edge of the town's community center, watching as a group of teenagers set up laptops and projectors for the evening's digital storytelling workshop. The air was crisp with the promise of fall, leaves crunching underfoot as the sun dipped behind the wide Nebraska horizon. Just months ago, this scene would have seemed impossible. The community center, once a quiet relic, was now alive with energy and possibility, fueled by the connection Starlink had brought to Cedar Creek. The workshop was part of Margaret's vision to embrace the future by blending tradition with technology, a way for young and old alike to tell their stories, share their histories, and build bridges across generations. As she moved through the room, greeting familiar faces, she felt a swell of pride. The town that once felt forgotten was waking up, step by step, to a new reality. For Margaret, this was more than just about internet access. It was about reclaiming identity, purpose, and connection in a world that seemed to rush past rural America. The digital divide was a symbol of neglect and isolation, but also a challenge, a call to action. She thought about Elon Musk's words: "When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor." That mindset had carried her through dark moments of doubt and uncertainty. The workshop began with young people sharing videos and photos of their families, their farms, and the landscapes that shaped their lives. Elders contributed stories passed down through generations, stories that might have been lost without this digital revival. Margaret watched as smiles spread, as walls of silence and loneliness crumbled under the weight of shared experience. The merging of voices, young and old, sparked a powerful sense of belonging. In the weeks that followed, Margaret's vision grew. She partnered with regional schools to integrate technology into curriculums and pushed for broadband expansion initiatives. She worked tirelessly to secure grants and funding, speaking to officials and corporate leaders alike. Each success was a step forward, but also a reminder of how much more needed to be done. At home, her family life flourished alongside her advocacy. Sarah's visits became more frequent, each one deepening their bond. Michael shared stories of his own tech ventures, inspiring Margaret to explore new online projects. The grandchildren, once distant figures, were now active participants in Cedar Creek's digital renaissance. Margaret found joy in teaching them about the natural world while learning from their digital fluency. The balance between past and future felt right. Yet challenges remained. Some community members resisted change, clinging to the comfort of familiar routines. Margaret met skepticism with patience and empathy, understanding that fear of the unknown could be as powerful as any technological barrier. She invited doubters to workshops, showed them the benefits firsthand, and celebrated every small victory. Slowly, the tide was turning. One day, Margaret received a letter from a young entrepreneur in a nearby town, thanking her for her blog and the inspiration it provided. The letter spoke of hope and determination, of plans to launch an online craft business that would support her family and community. Margaret's heart swelled with pride. This was the ripple effect she had dreamed of, the power of one story to ignite many more. She responded with encouragement and an offer to connect her with others who could help. Meanwhile, Margaret's own creative projects blossomed. She began producing a podcast series featuring voices from rural America, sharing stories of innovation, resilience, and transformation. The series quickly gained traction, bringing attention to the often overlooked challenges and triumphs of communities like Cedar Creek. Through her storytelling, Margaret became a bridge, connecting listeners from city to country, young to old. Her voice was a beacon of hope, proof that change was possible at any age. One crisp winter evening, as snow blanketed the fields, Margaret sat by the fire reflecting on the path she'd traveled. From the depths of isolation to the front lines of a rural digital revolution, she had been shaped by courage, connection, and the spark of a visionary's example. She realized that embracing the future was not about abandoning the past but building on it, honoring heritage while welcoming innovation. She thought about the legacy she wanted to leave, not just for her family, but for the countless others still waiting to be seen and heard. "I was never too old," she whispered to the firelight, "I was just learning to embrace what comes next." As the stars glittered outside her window, Margaret felt a profound peace. The future was unknown, yes, but it was also full of promise, a promise she was determined to help others claim. With Starlink's connection lighting the way, Cedar Creek was no longer a place forgotten by time or technology. It was a community renewed, ready to face whatever lay ahead with resilience and hope. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Margaret woke early to the soft glow of dawn filtering through her bedroom window. The quiet hum of the Starlink dish outside was a steady reminder of the invisible thread linking her to the wider world. It was more than just internet access, it was a symbol of transformation, a bridge connecting the past to the future. Today was important. The county had organized a summit on rural innovation, and Margaret had been invited to speak alongside tech leaders, educators, and policymakers. This was a chance to bring Cedar Creek's story to a larger stage and to advocate for the communities still struggling in the shadows. The preparations felt nerve-wracking, but Margaret reminded herself of the journey she'd taken, from feeling forgotten and isolated to becoming a voice of hope and change. As she reviewed her notes, she reflected on the ripple effect Starlink had unleashed in Cedar Creek. What began as a simple solution to a connectivity problem had evolved into a movement that touched every aspect of life: education, business, health, and social bonds. Margaret's story wasn't just about technology. It was about empowerment, resilience, and the courage to defy limitations imposed by age, geography, or circumstance. At the summit, the auditorium buzzed with anticipation. Margaret took the stage, her heart steady but her mind sharp. She shared Cedar Creek's journey candidly, the struggles with loneliness, the skepticism, the small victories that added up to a new chapter for her town. She spoke about the power of connection, both digital and human, and the need for ongoing investment in rural infrastructure. Her voice carried the weight of lived experience, and the audience responded with thoughtful questions and applause. After the panel, Margaret mingled with attendees, exchanging ideas and forging new partnerships. She met young entrepreneurs eager to collaborate, educators passionate about bridging the digital divide, and policymakers committed to making rural voices heard. Each conversation reinforced the idea that change was a collective effort, fueled by diverse perspectives and shared determination. Returning home, Margaret felt energized but aware of the work still ahead. The challenges facing rural America were deep-rooted and complex, but the promise of technology, combined with community resolve, offered a path forward. She was more convinced than ever that the greatest innovations happened when people came together to solve problems that mattered. Back in Cedar Creek, the impact of the summit soon became evident. New programs launched, funding increased, and local businesses flourished. Margaret's mentorship initiative expanded, connecting elders with youth in ways that nurtured both. Technology became a tool for creativity, education, and economic opportunity. Margaret's own creative pursuits also took a leap forward. She began collaborating with artists and storytellers from across the country, producing digital exhibitions that highlighted rural life in vivid detail. These projects challenged stereotypes and celebrated the richness of small-town America, inviting broader audiences to see beyond clichés and assumptions. At home, her family continued to be a source of strength and joy. Sarah and Michael remained her closest allies, sharing ideas, laughter, and support. The grandchildren's visits, both virtual and in person, filled the house with life. Margaret found new ways to blend tradition with innovation, teaching family recipes while exploring digital photography, combining old journals with podcasts. Each moment was a reminder that legacy was not fixed but evolving, shaped by love, learning, and courage. Yet, amid progress, Margaret remained grounded in the realities that many still faced. She knew that not every story was one of triumph. Some struggled with health issues, economic hardship, or isolation. She used her platform to amplify those voices, advocating for inclusive solutions that honored dignity and diversity. The work was ongoing, demanding patience and empathy. One evening, as she sat on her porch watching the stars emerge, Margaret reflected on how far she'd come. The fear and loneliness that once gripped her had given way to hope and connection. She was part of a new narrative, one where age was not a barrier but a bridge, where rural communities were seen not as forgotten but as vital contributors to America's future. Elon Musk's example had been a spark, but the real power came from within, the courage to choose change, to embrace uncertainty, and to believe in the possibility of renewal. "I was never too old," she whispered, "I was just learning to live beyond connection." The night deepened, filled with quiet promise. For Margaret and Cedar Creek, the journey was far from over, but the path was clear, a path lit by resilience, community, and the unyielding belief that it is never too late to change. Margaret's days grew busier, yet more fulfilling, as Cedar Creek's transformation deepened. What had started as a personal journey was now a shared mission, to build bridges, not just of internet signals, but of understanding, opportunity, and hope. She often thought about the phrase Elon Musk once said, "Some people don't like change, but you need to embrace change if the alternative is disaster." For Margaret, the alternative had been isolation, invisibility, and fading into the background. The new path wasn't always easy, but it was necessary. One chilly spring morning, Margaret joined a meeting with local educators, business owners, and healthcare providers. Their goal was ambitious: to create a comprehensive digital network that would serve every household, farm, and school in the county. Beyond providing access, they aimed to use technology to improve health outcomes, create jobs, and keep young people connected to the community. At the heart of this plan was a shared belief that technology could be a tool for equity. Margaret knew the challenges well: limited resources, outdated infrastructure, and skepticism, but she also believed in the power of collective will. Over the coming months, the group worked tirelessly, applying for grants, collaborating with tech companies, and organizing community forums to ensure everyone had a voice. Margaret's leadership was steady but inclusive, inviting ideas and concerns with equal respect. Meanwhile, the digital mentorship program blossomed into something bigger than she had imagined. Youth mentors helped elders with everything from setting up email accounts to launching small businesses online. The bonds that formed were powerful, breaking down generational divides and building new networks of support. Joe, the neighbor who had once doubted, was now an enthusiastic participant, mentoring younger farmers on sustainable agriculture techniques shared through online platforms. At home, Margaret's family life thrived alongside her work. Sarah was now a regular collaborator, helping with podcast production and community outreach. Michael shared his own tech insights, encouraging Margaret to experiment with new media. The grandchildren's curiosity and energy reminded her that the future was theirs to shape. Yet, as always, the journey was marked by setbacks and moments of doubt. When a severe storm knocked out power and disrupted internet service, the fragility of rural infrastructure was laid bare. Margaret and her team scrambled to provide support, coordinating relief efforts and communicating updates through backup networks. The crisis underscored the urgent need for resilient, sustainable solutions. Undeterred, Margaret reached out to experts in renewable energy and emergency management to explore innovative ways to strengthen the community's defenses. She championed projects to install solar panels and backup batteries, aiming to create a network that could withstand future storms. Her passion was contagious, inspiring others to get involved. One evening, as she prepared for a virtual town hall meeting, Margaret reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The loneliness and fear she once felt were replaced by a sense of purpose and connection. She thought of Elon Musk's relentless drive, his willingness to take risks and challenge the status quo. It wasn't about being fearless, it was about pushing forward despite fear. Margaret felt the same courage rising within her. The town hall was a success. Residents shared stories of how technology had changed their lives, farmers accessing real-time market prices, students taking online courses, seniors video chatting with loved ones miles away. The sense of community pride was palpable. Margaret closed the meeting by reminding everyone that the work was ongoing and that each person's voice mattered. As the seasons turned, Cedar Creek continued to evolve. New businesses opened online, schools expanded digital curricula, and healthcare providers launched telemedicine programs that improved access for many. Margaret's digital storytelling platform gained regional attention, capturing the hearts of listeners across the state. Through it all, she remained grounded in the values that had sustained her: empathy, persistence, and the belief that connection could heal even the deepest wounds. One quiet afternoon, Margaret received a message that touched her deeply. It was from a former neighbor who had moved to the city years ago but had been following Cedar Creek's progress online. The message thanked Margaret for keeping the spirit of their community alive and invited her to speak at a major conference on rural innovation. The invitation was both an honor and a challenge, pushing Margaret beyond her comfort zone. She accepted, recognizing the opportunity to amplify the voices of those often overlooked. Preparing for the conference, Margaret pored over stories, data, and personal reflections. She wanted to convey the complexity of rural life, the struggles, the strengths, and the extraordinary potential. She knew that technology alone was not a cure-all but a catalyst, a tool to be wielded with intention and heart. On stage, Margaret spoke with honesty and passion, sharing Cedar Creek's journey from isolation to empowerment. She highlighted the role of Starlink and Elon Musk's vision as sparks, but emphasized that the real power came from community courage and collaboration. The audience responded with standing ovations and heartfelt questions, opening doors to new partnerships and resources. Back home, Margaret felt a renewed sense of possibility. The bridges she and her community were building spanned more than physical distance, they connected hopes, dreams, and futures. As the sun set over the rolling fields, Margaret stood on her porch, the stars beginning to twinkle overhead. She thought about the past and the road ahead. She knew there would be challenges, but also joy and discovery. She whispered to the night sky, "I was never too old to build bridges. I was just waiting to start." Margaret sat at her kitchen table, the soft glow of her laptop screen illuminating a room filled with memories, faded photographs, handmade quilts, and a worn journal filled with reflections from decades past. It was early morning, and the world outside was still quiet, but inside, Margaret's mind was buzzing. She was preparing her next blog post, one she hoped would inspire others like her who felt stuck, forgotten, or too old to change. Persistence, that was the word on her mind. Elon Musk's journey had been a powerful reminder of the value of never giving up, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. She typed slowly, carefully choosing words that carried both honesty and hope. "When I first heard Elon say, 'Persistence is very important. You should not give up unless you are forced to give up,' it struck a chord deep within me, she wrote. Because for too long, I believed my time had passed. That at my age, it was too late to start over, to learn something new, to make a difference. Margaret paused and looked around the room. She thought of her younger self, hesitant and unsure, burdened by regrets and loss. But she also thought of the woman she had become, resilient, connected, and full of purpose. The path hadn't been easy. There were moments when she questioned her choices, when fear whispered that she was too old, too slow, too behind. But with every small step forward, installing Starlink, starting the mentorship program, sharing stories, she built momentum. Persistence, she realized, was not about never failing but about rising every time she did. The post was more than words, it was a testament to the human spirit's capacity for renewal. When she published it, the response was overwhelming. Messages poured in from readers across the country, seniors rekindling passions, caregivers seeking community, rural residents fighting their own battles with connectivity and isolation. Margaret felt the profound connection of shared struggle and shared hope. That week, she was invited to participate in a panel discussion about technology and aging. She spoke candidly about the challenges of learning new tools later in life, the fears of obsolescence, and the transformative power of persistence. Her story resonated with audiences of all ages, sparking conversations that went beyond technology to touch on dignity, identity, and purpose. At home, the rhythm of daily life provided balance. Sarah and Michael continued to be sources of encouragement and companionship, each contributing their strengths to the collective effort. The grandchildren's laughter and curiosity filled the house, reminding Margaret that learning was lifelong and joy was timeless. Yet, persistence was tested again when a major storm hit Cedar Creek, causing widespread outages and damaging infrastructure. The Starlink connection, though more resilient than traditional systems, was strained, and the community faced days of uncertainty. Margaret mobilized volunteers, coordinated with emergency responders, and used her digital platforms to keep everyone informed and connected. The crisis was a stark reminder that progress was fragile, but it also revealed the depth of community strength. People came together, sharing resources, checking on neighbors, and finding new ways to adapt. Margaret's leadership was steady and compassionate, a beacon in the storm. In the aftermath, discussions turned to building greater resilience, investing in backup power systems, diversifying communication networks, and training community members in emergency response technology. Margaret pushed for inclusive planning, ensuring that no one was left behind in the face of future challenges. Throughout these trials, she kept returning to Elon Musk's example. His willingness to face setbacks head-on, to iterate and innovate, fueled her own determination. She realized that persistence was not just a personal virtue but a communal necessity. It was the glue holding the town's transformation together. One afternoon, as spring blossomed into summer, Margaret received an unexpected invitation. A documentary filmmaker had heard about Cedar Creek's digital renaissance and wanted to tell the story, focusing on how technology and persistence had reshaped a community and a life. Margaret hesitated at first, wary of the spotlight. But she saw the opportunity to amplify voices that often went unheard. She agreed. The filming process was both challenging and rewarding. It involved revisiting old memories, sharing vulnerabilities, and celebrating triumphs. Margaret's story became a thread woven into a larger tapestry of rural resilience and innovation. When the documentary premiered online, the response was powerful. Viewers from across the nation connected with the themes of hope, perseverance, and the courage to change at any age. Margaret received messages from people who felt inspired to take their own steps forward, to embrace technology, and to build community. The experience deepened her conviction that stories were among the most potent tools for change. They humanized complex issues and sparked empathy and action. Margaret's voice had become a bridge, connecting individuals to shared dreams and possibilities. As summer faded into fall, Margaret prepared for a speaking tour, visiting libraries, senior centers, and universities to share her journey. Each talk was a reminder of the diversity and resilience of the human spirit. She met veterans, artists, caregivers, and lifelong learners, all united by a desire to grow and contribute. The connections she forged reaffirmed her belief that persistence, fueled by community and vision, could transform lives. One chilly evening, as the stars twinkled overhead and the quiet of Cedar Creek settled around her, Margaret reflected on the meaning of persistence. It wasn't about stubbornness or blind determination. It was about embracing change with humility and courage, about rising after failure, about believing in the power of small steps to create big change. I was never too old to persist, she thought, I was just learning what it truly meant to keep going. With that thought, Margaret felt a deep sense of peace and purpose. The future remained uncertain, but she knew one thing for sure: as long as she kept moving forward, as long as she held on to hope and connection, anything was possible. Cedar Creek was no longer the quiet, overlooked town it had been just a few years before. The streets buzzed with activity, fueled not only by the change in seasons but by a deeper shift, one of spirit and possibility. Margaret walked down Main Street, the crisp autumn air carrying the scent of wood smoke and freshly baked pies. She paused outside the new co-op cafe, where farmers, students, and entrepreneurs gathered to share ideas over steaming mugs of coffee and the glow of tablets and smartphones. The co-op was a direct result of the digital transformation Starlink had sparked, providing a physical hub for a community increasingly connected to the wider world. Inside, Margaret spotted familiar faces: Joe, the farmer who had once doubted the power of technology, now enthusiastically discussing new market strategies with a group of young adults. The sense of optimism was palpable. But the transformation ran deeper than infrastructure and business. It was woven into the daily lives and relationships of Cedar Creek's residents. Schools had expanded their digital curricula, offering courses in coding, digital arts, and online entrepreneurship. Students who once dreamed of leaving town now envisioned building futures right where they were, connected to a global network yet rooted in community. Healthcare had taken a leap forward as well. Telemedicine programs made it easier for elderly residents to consult doctors without long drives, while wellness apps helped monitor chronic conditions. Mental health services became more accessible, breaking down stigma through virtual support groups. Margaret's own involvement with the Community Storytelling Project had grown into a multimedia platform, showcasing local voices and experiences. These stories celebrated not only success but also struggle, reminding everyone that progress was neither linear nor easy. It was messy, human, and beautiful. One afternoon, Margaret received a call that brought both joy and reflection. Sarah was expecting her first child. The news stirred emotions Margaret hadn't anticipated: hope, pride, and a bittersweet awareness of time's passage. She thought about the legacy she wanted to leave, not just in technology or community programs, but in values, resilience, kindness, and the courage to embrace change. As the town prepared for the annual Harvest Festival, Margaret found herself at the heart of preparations. This year's theme was Connected Roots, celebrating the fusion of heritage and innovation. The festival was more than tradition, it was a symbol of Cedar Creek's journey from isolation to empowerment. Booths showcased local crafts alongside demonstrations of digital tools, farmers shared harvest stories while teaching drone piloting, and workshops connected generations in hands-on learning. During the festival's opening ceremony, Margaret was invited to speak. Standing before a crowd that included children, elders, newcomers, and longtime residents, she reflected on the path they had traveled together. She spoke of Elon Musk's words about pushing boundaries and the importance of daring to dream, no matter your age or circumstance. Her message was clear: the future belonged to those willing to embrace it, to learn and grow continuously. The applause was warm and heartfelt. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and lanterns lit the town square, Margaret sat with friends and family. Conversations flowed easily, from technology and education to hopes for the future and memories of the past. The sense of belonging was tangible, a healing balm for years of doubt and loneliness. As the stars twinkled above, Margaret felt a deep gratitude. Cedar Creek was more than a place. It was a living story of transformation, a testament to the power of connection and persistence. She thought back to her first hesitant steps into the digital world, the moments of fear and uncertainty, and the spark that Elon Musk's example had ignited within her. "I was never too old to change," she whispered to the night, "I was just waiting to believe it." The journey ahead was still unfolding, filled with unknowns and challenges, but Margaret faced it with hope and determination. Cedar Creek's story was far from over, it was just beginning. Margaret watched as the morning sun cast long shadows across the fields surrounding Cedar Creek. The landscape was familiar, yet everything felt different now. The changes sparked by Starlink and the community's resilience had created new possibilities, especially for the younger generation. Sarah's pregnancy was a symbol of hope, but also a reminder that the future belonged to those who would inherit the town's legacy. Margaret found herself increasingly focused on youth engagement. She wanted to ensure that the opportunities created by technology and connection would be accessible to all, especially the children who might otherwise feel trapped by geography or circumstance. One crisp autumn day, Margaret visited Cedar Creek High School, where the principal had invited her to speak about her journey and the importance of embracing change. The auditorium was filled with teenagers, some skeptical, others curious. Margaret began with a question: what if everything you thought about your future was wrong? What if you could build a life here, connected to the world, without leaving the place you love? She shared her story honestly, her fears, mistakes, and the moment Elon Musk's words gave her permission to start again. The students listened intently as she described how Starlink transformed her community, from education and healthcare to business and creativity. She emphasized that technology was a tool, but it was their courage, curiosity, and persistence that would shape their futures. After her talk, students approached her with questions and ideas, some about starting coding clubs, others about creating digital art or launching small businesses online. Margaret was inspired by their energy and vision. She realized that this generation wasn't just the future, they were the present, ready to lead and innovate. In the following weeks, Margaret worked with teachers, parents, and local leaders to launch new programs focused on STEM education, digital literacy, and entrepreneurship. She helped connect students with mentors and resources, fostering an environment where creativity and learning thrived. Meanwhile, at home, the excitement around Sarah's upcoming baby grew. Margaret found joy in preparing for the new arrival, balancing her community work with moments of family connection. The anticipation reminded her that change was a constant cycle, endings and beginnings intertwined. The community itself was evolving. New families moved in, drawn by the improved connectivity and opportunities. Remote workers, artists, and young couples saw Cedar Creek not as a place to leave but as a place to grow. Small businesses flourished, blending tradition with innovation. Margaret took pride in the town's growing diversity and vitality. Yet, she also knew the importance of honoring the past. History and heritage were woven into Cedar Creek's identity, grounding the community even as it reached for the future. The local museum expanded its digital archive, preserving stories and artifacts while inviting residents to contribute their own memories online. The initiative bridged generations, connecting young people to their roots and elders to new technology. One evening, Margaret joined a gathering at the community center where elders and youth shared stories and skills. The atmosphere was warm and lively, filled with laughter, music, and the hum of conversation. Margaret watched as a teenage girl taught a senior how to use a tablet, while an elder shared stories of farming techniques passed down through generations. The scene was a living testament to the power of connection and mutual respect. Reflecting on these moments, Margaret felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The community was no longer divided by age or technology but united in purpose and possibility. She recalled Elon Musk's belief in pushing boundaries and the necessity of embracing change. For Cedar Creek, and for herself, that meant never settling, always learning, and lifting others along the way. As winter approached, Margaret prepared for the birth of her first grandchild, feeling the weight and wonder of legacy. She knew the road ahead would have challenges, but the foundation laid by persistence, connection, and courage would support the next generation's journey. In the quiet of a snowy evening, Margaret looked out over the town, the lights twinkling like stars against the dark. She whispered a promise, to nurture, to support, and to continue building a future where no one felt too old, too isolated, or too forgotten to change. I was never too old to believe in the next generation, she thought, I was just learning to trust the future. Margaret sat quietly in her favorite chair by the window, the soft afternoon light filtering through the lace curtains, casting gentle patterns on the worn wooden floor. She had come a long way from the woman who once questioned her own relevance, doubted her ability to adapt, and felt left behind by a rapidly changing world. Yet even now, in the midst of progress and community transformation, moments of doubt still surfaced. It was natural, she told herself, after all, change was never simple or straightforward. Sometimes the hardest battle was not against external obstacles but within the mind. She remembered a phrase Elon Musk had shared in an interview, when something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor. Those words had carried her through many dark nights, when fear threatened to silence her voice. But even Elon's bold mindset acknowledged the weight of uncertainty. Margaret's doubts often came from well-meaning voices, skeptical neighbors, cautious family members, even her own internal critic. Is this really possible for someone my age? She had asked herself more than once. Am I too late to make a difference? Yet each time, she pushed forward, propelled by a vision that extended beyond herself. The community's growth was proof that persistence mattered. One chilly autumn morning, Margaret attended a regional conference on rural revitalization. The room was filled with policymakers, entrepreneurs, and advocates. As she listened to the speakers, she noticed a recurring theme: rural areas were often seen as outdated, irrelevant, or incapable of innovation. The narrative frustrated her. Cedar Creek's story was proof otherwise. When it was her turn to speak, Margaret shared the journey of her town, from isolation to connection, from skepticism to hope. She described the moment Starlink arrived and how it became a catalyst for change. She spoke of community resilience, the power of storytelling, and the importance of including all voices, especially those of seniors and youth. The audience was captivated, many nodding in agreement, some with tears in their eyes. Margaret realized that overcoming doubt was not just personal, it was collective. Changing perceptions required courage and persistence on multiple fronts. Back home, Margaret continued to face challenges. Technology glitches, funding hurdles, and occasional resistance tested her resolve. But every setback was met with renewed determination. She embraced a mindset of learning rather than perfection, understanding that growth often came through trial and error. One afternoon, she received a call from Michael, her son, who shared news of a new initiative at his tech company aimed at bridging the digital divide in rural communities nationwide. He asked if Cedar Creek could serve as a pilot site. Margaret was thrilled but cautious. She knew that scaling success wasn't simple and that maintaining community trust was paramount. They discussed the need for transparency, inclusivity, and ongoing support. The collaboration blossomed into a partnership that brought additional resources and expertise to Cedar Creek, while preserving the community's autonomy and identity. As winter deepened, Margaret found comfort in small rituals: morning walks through snow-dusted fields, evenings by the fire sharing stories with family, and quiet moments of reflection. She reminded herself that doubt was not weakness but a signal to pause, reassess, and recommit. In these moments, she returned to Elon Musk's example, his fearless approach to risk, his belief in the impossible, and his relentless drive despite failures. Margaret understood now that overcoming doubt was less about eliminating fear and more about choosing to act in spite of it. One evening, as the wind howled outside and snow blanketed the landscape, Margaret sat down to write a new blog post titled "The Power of Doubt." She wrote openly about her struggles with fear and uncertainty, the voices that questioned her path, and the ways she found strength. She invited readers to embrace doubt as a natural part of growth and to find their own courage. The post resonated deeply with her audience. Messages flowed in from people across the country, many seniors, who felt seen and heard. They shared their own fears and triumphs, forming a virtual community of resilience. Margaret felt a profound connection and renewed purpose. The story of Cedar Creek was no longer just about technology, it was about the human heart and spirit. It was about the courage to face doubt and move forward anyway. As the new year approached, Margaret reflected on the journey so far. She acknowledged that while progress had been remarkable, the work was far from over. New challenges awaited. Shifting economic landscapes, evolving technology, and the ongoing effort to keep everyone connected and included. But Margaret was ready. She had learned that persistence was fueled by hope, and hope was rooted in action. She knew that the community she loved was strong because of its people, their stories, struggles, and unwavering belief in a better future. Standing at her window one evening, watching the first snowflakes of the season fall softly, Margaret whispered to herself, "I was never too old to overcome doubt. I was just learning how to trust myself." Margaret stood at the edge of the town hall meeting, feeling a mixture of anticipation and responsibility. The room was filled with a cross-section of Cedar Creek's residents, farmers, teachers, retirees, young families, and newcomers, gathered to discuss the ongoing challenge of bridging the digital divide not just within their community, but across rural America. Though Starlink had transformed their town in profound ways, Margaret knew many others still struggled in places far less connected. The discussion that evening was fueled by urgency and hope. Margaret took the floor, her voice steady but passionate as she recounted Cedar Creek's journey, from the days of slow, unreliable dial-up to the moment Starlink satellites brought fast, reliable internet to their doorsteps. She spoke about how connectivity had opened doors, new educational programs, telemedicine access, small business growth, and a renewed sense of belonging. Yet, she reminded the group, the digital divide was more than just a technical issue. It was a matter of equity, dignity, and opportunity. Many rural communities faced economic hardships, aging infrastructure, and a scarcity of resources that left them behind in the modern world. The room fell silent as Margaret shared her vision, a coordinated effort to expand access through public-private partnerships, community involvement, and innovative technology like Starlink. She emphasized that solutions needed to be tailored, inclusive, and sustainable, addressing both infrastructure and the human element. Training, support, and trust building. A young teacher named Daniel raised his hand. What about those who don't have the skills or confidence to use the technology? How do we make sure no one is left behind, even if they have access? Margaret smiled, grateful for the question. She acknowledged that access alone wasn't enough. Digital literacy programs, ongoing mentorship, and patient, compassionate teaching were essential. She spoke of the community storytelling project that had connected elders with tech-savvy youth, creating bridges between generations. The synergy had been transformative, building not only skills but relationships. As the meeting continued, ideas flowed freely, plans for community training centers, partnerships with local businesses, grant applications, and outreach efforts targeting isolated households. Margaret saw the collective energy fueling a movement larger than Cedar Creek alone. After the meeting, Margaret stayed late to talk with attendees. She connected with Ruth, a retired nurse who wanted to start a virtual health support group, and Marcus, a farmer interested in using drone technology to monitor crops more efficiently. Each conversation reinforced Margaret's belief that bridging the divide required listening, adapting, and collaboration. The following months brought both progress and new challenges. Funding was secured for a digital hub in the town library, staffed by volunteers trained to assist residents with technology. Workshops on everything from basic internet use to advanced coding attracted diverse participants eager to learn. Margaret partnered with regional nonprofits and tech companies to expand broadband access to outlying areas still underserved by traditional providers. Alongside infrastructure improvements, community leaders launched initiatives to address affordability, recognizing that internet service cost was a barrier for many. Subsidies, payment plans, and shared access points helped ease the burden. Meanwhile, Margaret continued sharing Cedar Creek's story through blogs, podcasts, and speaking engagements. Her message resonated widely, highlighting how technology, when coupled with community spirit and persistence, could transform rural life. Elon Musk's vision of connecting the world through Starlink had sparked a revolution, but the work of bridging divides was ongoing and deeply human. One crisp spring morning, Margaret received a call from a representative of the FCC inviting her to participate in a national advisory panel on rural connectivity. It was a recognition of Cedar Creek's progress and a chance to influence policy at the highest level. Though humbled, Margaret embraced the opportunity with determination. At the panel, she advocated fiercely for rural voices, emphasizing the importance of flexible, community-driven solutions. She urged leaders to prioritize not just technology deployment, but education, local empowerment, and sustained support. Her contributions helped shape new programs aimed at expanding affordable broadband and digital literacy nationwide. Back in Cedar Creek, the sense of possibility continued to grow. The digital hub thrived as a center of learning and connection. Young entrepreneurs launched online businesses, elders explored new ways to stay in touch with family, and students accessed resources that once seemed out of reach. Margaret often visited the hub, offering encouragement and sharing stories that bridged past and future. Yet, despite the progress, Margaret remained grounded in humility. She knew that technology was a tool, not a cure-all. The true bridge was the human connection, empathy, patience, and the willingness to walk alongside others in their journey. Reflecting on Elon Musk's approach, bold vision combined with relentless iteration, Margaret understood that bridging divides was a process, requiring resilience and collaboration. As summer settled over Cedar Creek, Margaret stood on the porch of her home, gazing out at fields glowing golden in the evening light. The community was changing, evolving, growing stronger and more connected. But the greatest transformation was in the hearts of its people, renewed hope, shared purpose, and a belief that no one, no place, was too far gone to be reached. "We're all connected," Margaret whispered, "and together, we'll bridge every divide." Margaret stood at the edge of the Cedar Creek Community Center, watching as a group of children and elders gathered around a projector screen set up in the town square. The evening air was warm and fragrant with the scent of blooming jasmine, a subtle reminder of how seasons changed just as the town had transformed. Tonight's event was a celebration, not just of technology, but of people. It was a legacy of connection that Margaret had helped nurture, born from the spark that Elon Musk's Starlink had ignited years ago. The screen flickered to life, displaying photos and videos collected from decades of community stories. Children laughed at clips of themselves learning to code, elders smiled at memories of harvest festivals long past, families watched as their lives were woven together through shared experience and technology. For Margaret, it was a moment of profound fulfillment. She thought back to the early days when she first doubted her ability to keep pace with a world racing ahead. She remembered the loneliness, the fear of becoming invisible, and the overwhelming sense that time had passed her by. But that fear had been overcome, step by step, connection by connection. It was Elon Musk's bold example that had given her permission to dream again, to act despite uncertainty, and to believe that reinvention was always possible. The community had not just adapted, it had thrived. Businesses flourished, education transformed, healthcare reached more people, and the digital divide began to close. But more than that, Cedar Creek had become a place where every voice mattered, where generations learned from one another, and where hope was woven into the very fabric of daily life. As the stories played, Margaret noticed Sarah standing nearby, cradling her newborn son, the newest member of the community. The sight stirred something deep within Margaret, a powerful sense of continuity and responsibility. She realized that her work was not only about technology or infrastructure, but about nurturing a future where every child born in Cedar Creek would have the chance to thrive without barriers. After the presentation, the crowd gathered for conversation and celebration. Margaret spoke with longtime friends, new residents, and even visitors from neighboring towns curious about Cedar Creek's transformation. They shared stories of challenges faced and overcome, of lessons learned, and of dreams still to be pursued. One visitor, a woman from a distant rural town, asked Margaret how to start similar changes in her own community. Margaret smiled, recalling the words Elon Musk had once said, "When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor." She told the woman to begin with belief. Belief in the power of connection, in the courage of individuals, and in the strength of community. It starts with one step, Margaret said, and then another. You don't have to have all the answers at once. You just have to be willing to begin. That night, as stars sparkled over Cedar Creek, Margaret reflected on the journey. She thought of the many hands that had shaped the town's future, neighbors who taught one another, children who dreamed boldly, elders who shared wisdom, and leaders who dared to imagine better. She felt a quiet pride but also a deep humility. The legacy of connection was not hers alone, it belonged to everyone who had dared to hope and act. In her heart, Margaret understood that aging was not a sunset but a continuum of possibilities. She had been too old to believe in change once, but now she knew the truth, that transformation was timeless, and every moment held the potential for new beginnings. She whispered softly, "I was never too old to leave a legacy. I was just waiting to start." Margaret stood on the porch of her childhood home, now warmed by the soft glow of evening lamps inside. The house smelled faintly of pine and wood polish, memories layered deep within its walls. She took a deep breath, feeling the bittersweet weight of the years, but also the undeniable energy of what lay ahead. The future, once a source of fear and uncertainty, had become a canvas, vast, inviting, and brimming with possibility. The transformation in Cedar Creek was more than just the result of technology. It was the spirit of a community that refused to fade away, that pushed back against the idea of being too old, too small, or too rural to matter. Margaret felt the echo of Elon Musk's relentless drive, the way he shattered assumptions and pushed relentlessly into the unknown. That spirit had become a beacon for her and for many others in Cedar Creek. Walking through the town, Margaret noticed subtle but profound changes everywhere. The local library, once a quiet, dusty building, now hummed with activity, students using tablets, seniors attending digital literacy classes, artists collaborating on virtual exhibits. The grocery store had expanded its online ordering and delivery service, connecting customers with fresh local produce and essentials. At the community center, a group of volunteers prepared for a workshop on sustainable farming technologies, blending tradition with innovation. The young and the old worked side by side, united by a shared vision. Margaret's own role had evolved as well. No longer just a reluctant learner, she had become a mentor and advocate, a bridge between generations and a voice for rural innovation. She spent her days helping neighbors navigate new technology, supporting local entrepreneurs, and speaking at conferences to inspire other communities. Yet, she remained grounded in the simple joys: morning coffee with Sarah and her grandson, quiet walks along the creek, evenings filled with music and laughter. One afternoon, Margaret received an invitation to join a national initiative focused on fostering rural innovation hubs. It was an opportunity to bring Cedar Creek's story to a broader stage and to help shape a movement that could redefine rural America. She accepted with gratitude and determination. At the inaugural meeting, Margaret found herself surrounded by visionary leaders, entrepreneurs, and policymakers. The energy was electric, fueled by a shared commitment to rewriting the narrative of rural communities. She shared Cedar Creek's journey, emphasizing that technology alone was not enough, it was the courage to adapt, the strength of community, and the willingness to embrace change that made the difference. Discussions centered on building infrastructure, supporting education, and creating sustainable economic opportunities. Margaret advocated fiercely for the inclusion of seniors and historically marginalized groups, insisting that innovation be truly inclusive. Back in Cedar Creek, preparations began for a new community incubator, a space where residents could develop ideas, receive mentorship, and collaborate on projects that blended technology with local knowledge. The incubator would serve as a hub for creativity, learning, and economic renewal. Margaret helped design programs that catered to diverse needs, from youth coding camps to workshops on agritech and telehealth. The incubator symbolized not just a physical space, but a mindset, a commitment to continuous growth and the belief that the best was yet to come. As spring turned to summer, Cedar Creek buzzed with excitement. New businesses launched, local artists gained exposure through online platforms, and residents took pride in the community's vibrant spirit. Margaret often visited the incubator, offering encouragement and learning alongside others. She marveled at how far they had come, from a place isolated by geography to a beacon of possibility. Yet, Margaret knew that embracing the future meant acknowledging the past. She worked with local historians and educators to create digital archives preserving Cedar Creek's heritage, ensuring that progress honored roots and stories. The town's identity was a living tapestry woven from generations of resilience, creativity, and care. One evening, as Margaret sat on her porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, she reflected on her journey. The fears of aging, invisibility, and irrelevance had given way to a profound understanding that change was not a threat but an invitation. She had learned that life's value was not measured by age or circumstance but by the willingness to dream, to connect, and to act. The future was not fixed, it was theirs to shape. She whispered a quiet thank you, to the community, to Elon Musk's bold vision, and to herself for taking the first step. I am ready, she thought, to embrace whatever comes next. And with that, Margaret felt a deep peace settle within her, a peace born from knowing that she, and Cedar Creek, were not only surviving but thriving, connected by the invisible threads of hope, courage, and unyielding spirit. Margaret sat at her desk, the soft hum of her laptop filling the quiet room. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast a warm glow over Cedar Creek, where the buzz of daily life continued, intertwined with the steady pulse of digital connection. Tonight, Margaret was working on a new project, a digital storytelling platform designed to capture and share the stories of rural Americans, a mosaic of voices too often overlooked. She knew that technology alone couldn't heal isolation or rebuild community, it was the stories that held the true power to connect hearts and minds. Inspired by Elon Musk's vision of pushing boundaries and thinking beyond limits, Margaret envisioned a space where people from every walk of life, farmers, teachers, retirees, young parents, could share their experiences, struggles, and dreams. It was a place to celebrate resilience, wisdom, and hope, bridging generational and geographic divides. The idea was born out of a simple truth Margaret had come to cherish. Every person's story mattered, and by sharing those stories, communities could heal, grow, and inspire one another. She remembered the early days when Cedar Creek had felt invisible, disconnected, a place fading into silence. Starlink had brought the technology to connect, but it was the human stories that breathed life into those connections. The first story featured an elderly farmer named Hank, whose family had worked the same land for generations. Hank shared how Starlink had allowed him to access market prices in real time, transforming his business and outlook. Another was Sarah's story, young mother, teacher, and advocate, who spoke of how technology enabled her to work from home while caring for her son, creating a balance she once thought impossible. Margaret herself contributed her own reflections, candid and heartfelt, about facing doubt and rediscovering purpose later in life. The platform quickly gained traction, with submissions flowing in from all over the region. People wrote about triumphs and trials, about holding on to traditions while embracing innovation, about finding connection in unexpected places. Each story was a thread in a vibrant tapestry, weaving together the diverse fabric of rural life. One evening, Margaret hosted a virtual storytelling event, bringing together contributors and listeners from across the country. The room was filled with laughter, tears, and moments of shared understanding. Stories flowed freely, about loss and renewal, fear and courage, endings and new beginnings. The power of vulnerability created an atmosphere of trust and solidarity. As the event ended, Margaret felt a surge of hope. She realized that storytelling was more than a tool for connection, it was a catalyst for transformation. By giving voice to the overlooked, the unheard, the marginalized, communities could reclaim their narrative and chart a new course forward. The project attracted attention beyond Cedar Creek. Media outlets featured the platform, policymakers took note, and grants were secured to expand its reach. Margaret was invited to speak at conferences, sharing how storytelling combined with technology could reshape rural futures. She emphasized the importance of honoring lived experience and fostering inclusive dialogue. Yet, Margaret remained mindful of the challenges. She knew that digital access was just one piece of the puzzle and that building trust took time and effort. She worked closely with community leaders to ensure the platform was welcoming and accessible, providing training and support to participants. She encouraged storytelling as an act of empowerment rather than voyeurism. One day, Margaret received a message from a woman named Grace, who shared how the platform had helped her heal after years of isolation and loss. Grace wrote about reconnecting with her roots, finding community, and discovering new purpose through sharing her story. The message moved Margaret deeply, a testament to the profound impact of their work. In the quiet moments of reflection, Margaret acknowledged that the true game-changer was not just the technology or infrastructure, but the reclaiming of voice and agency. Elon Musk's Starlink had opened the door, but it was the power of stories that invited people in and made them stay. As the sun set over Cedar Creek, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, Margaret felt a deep sense of gratitude and possibility. The journey had been long and challenging, but it was far from over. With every story shared, every connection made, the community grew stronger, more resilient, and more hopeful. Margaret whispered to herself, "This is our legacy, the power of stories to change lives and light the way forward." Margaret stood quietly at the window of her home, watching the first snowfall of winter gently blanket Cedar Creek. The familiar hush of snow-covered fields felt like a symbol, not of an ending, but of a pause before renewal. She reflected on the journey that had transformed her life and the community around her, a journey sparked by a satellite constellation thousands of miles above the Earth and fueled by the courage to change despite age and circumstance. Once, she had believed the best years were behind her, that aging meant fading into obscurity, losing relevance, and surrendering dreams. But now she knew the truth: life's potential was not confined by years but expanded by the willingness to embrace new beginnings. The story of Cedar Creek had become a testament to that belief. Elon Musk's vision of connecting the world through Starlink had been the catalyst, the spark that ignited a transformation, but it was the people who turned that spark into a blaze. Margaret remembered the early days, when dial-up internet was a luxury, when children had to leave home to find opportunity, and when loneliness was a common companion. The arrival of Starlink had shattered the barriers of geography and isolation, bringing the world within reach. Yet it was not just about faster internet or clearer video calls, it was about restoring dignity, connection, and hope. Margaret's own transformation mirrored that of Cedar Creek. From a hesitant learner overwhelmed by technology, she became a mentor, advocate, and storyteller. She reconnected with estranged family, forged new friendships, and found purpose in service. The obstacles, skepticism, fear, physical decline, were real, but each step forward reaffirmed her belief that it was never too late to change, to grow, to matter. As snowflakes drifted past the window, Margaret's phone buzzed with a message from Sarah, the young mother who had become like family. "We're ready for the next chapter," Sarah wrote, "and so are you." Margaret smiled, feeling a surge of warmth. She knew that Cedar Creek's journey was ongoing, a continuous unfolding of possibility. The community was preparing to launch a new initiative, an intergenerational tech mentorship program designed to pair seniors with youth, combining experience with innovation. Margaret was set to lead the program, bridging the wisdom of age with the energy of youth. That night, the community gathered at the town hall for a celebration of progress and hope. The room was alive with laughter, music, and the glow of shared achievement. Margaret took the stage, her voice steady but filled with emotion as she addressed the crowd. "I thought this was the end," she said, "the closing chapter of my life. But it was only the beginning. We were never too old to matter. We were just waiting for permission to start again." She spoke of Elon Musk's example, the relentless pursuit of what others said was impossible, the courage to challenge limits and dream boldly. That same courage had taken root in Cedar Creek, in every heart willing to embrace change. Margaret urged the community to continue pushing forward, to hold tight to their stories and to each other, and to remember that connection was the greatest legacy. As applause filled the room, Margaret looked out at faces shining with hope and determination. She felt a profound sense of peace and possibility. Outside, the snow continued to fall softly, blanketing the town in quiet beauty. Margaret knew that like the seasons, life moved in cycles, times of rest, growth, and renewal. And no matter the age, every moment was a new beginning. She whispered to herself, "This is our time. Our story isn't finished. It's just getting started." The lights dimmed, and the celebration carried on, a chorus of voices united by a shared journey, a journey sparked by a satellite and fueled by the unyielding human spirit. In that moment, Margaret understood that true connection transcended technology. It was about the courage to change, the power of community, and the belief that it is never too late to shine again. Margaret sat quietly on the porch swing, the crisp autumn air carrying the faint scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke from nearby chimneys. Cedar Creek had changed so much over the years, yet some things remained comforting, the familiar creak of the old swing, the distant laughter of children playing near the creek, the gentle rhythm of a town waking slowly but surely into the future. Tonight, she wasn't alone. Sarah and her young son, Eli, sat beside her, bundled in warm blankets, watching the stars begin to twinkle above. Margaret smiled as she thought about how far they had all come, not just as individuals but as a community. It was a journey defined by connection and courage, a journey that started with Elon Musk's Starlink bringing high-speed internet to their rural town, and grew into something far more profound. Sarah nudged Margaret gently. "Mom, do you remember when we first got Starlink? It felt like a miracle. I never thought we'd have this much opportunity right here in Cedar Creek." Margaret nodded, her eyes reflecting the constellation of stars above. "I do. It was like the world finally opened its arms to us. But it wasn't just the technology, it was what we chose to do with it that mattered." Eli, only 6 but already curious and bright, tugged on Margaret's sleeve. "Grandma, will I be able to do all the things you did? Build things? Help people?" Margaret's heart swelled. She looked at Eli and saw a reflection of her younger self, hopeful, eager, ready to take on the world. "You can do anything, Eli. And better than I ever could. You have the tools, the community, and the courage. Your generation will take this even further." That night, Margaret reflected on the power of passing knowledge and hope from one generation to the next. The intergenerational tech mentorship program she had helped launch was thriving, bringing together seniors and youth to share skills, stories, and dreams. It wasn't just about teaching how to use devices or write code. It was about sharing wisdom and fostering empathy across age divides. She saw the spark of curiosity in young eyes and the pride in older hands guiding them. In many ways, Margaret felt the weight of history on her shoulders. She had become a keeper of stories, the legacy of a community that refused to be left behind. But now, more than ever, she understood that true legacy was not about holding on tightly, it was about letting go, about trusting the next generation to carry the torch forward. The following morning, Margaret was invited to speak at Cedar Creek High School's annual Innovation Day, a new tradition inspired by the town's transformation. Walking through the halls filled with buzzing energy and youthful enthusiasm, she was struck by the palpable sense of possibility. Students presented projects that blended technology with community service, solar-powered irrigation systems, apps connecting local artisans to markets, virtual reality experiences preserving town history. It was a celebration of creativity and purpose. When it was Margaret's turn to speak, she took a deep breath and looked out over the sea of young faces. "I want you all to know," she began, her voice steady and warm, "that you are the architects of the future. You live in a world that is changing faster than ever, and you have tools I never dreamed of when I was your age. But tools alone aren't enough. It's what you do with those tools, how you connect with your community, how you uplift each other, that will define who you are. She paused, letting her words settle. When Starlink came to Cedar Creek, it was more than just faster internet. It was a chance for us to rewrite our story. Some of us were scared, worried it was too late, or that we'd be left behind. But then we realized that it's never too late to learn, to grow, or to dream. And that lesson, never being too old or too small to matter, that's what I want you to carry with you. After the speech, students swarmed around Margaret, eager to ask questions, share ideas, and learn from her experience. She listened, laughed, and encouraged them, feeling the joy of being part of something bigger than herself. Later that week, Margaret sat with Sarah and Eli under the vast blue sky at the community garden, where elders taught children how to plant and harvest. It was another symbol of Cedar Creek's renaissance, a blending of tradition and innovation, care and curiosity. Sarah talked about her hopes for Eli's future, the opportunities she dreamed he would have, and the challenges she knew they'd face. Margaret listened, reminded that progress was never a straight line, and that resilience was built through community. As the seasons shifted again, Margaret received an unexpected invitation to a national summit on rural revitalization. Organizers wanted her to share Cedar Creek's story alongside other innovators, to inspire a wider movement. It was an honor, but also a challenge. Speaking on a national stage was daunting for someone who once believed her voice didn't matter. On the day of the summit, Margaret stood backstage, heart pounding, surrounded by leaders and visionaries. She remembered Elon Musk's words, "When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor." That mantra had carried her through moments of doubt and fear. Now, it propelled her forward. Taking the stage, Margaret shared Cedar Creek's journey. From isolation to connection, from doubt to hope. She spoke candidly about the struggles of aging, the barriers faced by rural communities, and the power of technology used with heart and purpose. Her words resonated, sparking questions, applause, and commitments from policymakers and entrepreneurs alike. Back home, Margaret's story was covered in local and national media, shining a spotlight on the possibilities of rural America. But more importantly, it reminded her community that their efforts mattered, that their courage and vision could inspire others. In quiet moments, Margaret often thought about Elon Musk, not as a distant celebrity, but as a symbol of fearless innovation and the refusal to accept limits. His vision had sparked a fire, but it was the people of Cedar Creek who kept it burning, turning technology into hope and dreams into reality. One evening, as the town gathered for the annual winter festival, Margaret looked around at the faces illuminated by twinkling lights and fire pits. Children danced, elders shared stories, and neighbors connected in ways that transcended age and background. The festival was not just a celebration of a season, but a celebration of life's continuous unfolding. Margaret approached the stage and, with microphone in hand, addressed the crowd. "This is what it's all about," she said softly. "Connection. Community. Courage. We started this journey thinking technology would change us, but it was really the people who changed the technology, and each other." She smiled, eyes glistening. "And now, as we look to the future, I want us all to remember that we are never too old to dream, too late to begin, or too small to make a difference. The torch has been passed, and it burns brighter with each new hand that takes it." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, but for Margaret, the real victory was quieter, a steady heartbeat of hope and possibility pulsing through Cedar Creek. As the festival carried on, Margaret stepped back, feeling a deep peace. She thought of Eli, Sarah, the community, and all those who had joined the journey. She understood now that legacy was living, breathing, and evolving. And in the night sky above, as the satellites of Starlink silently orbited the Earth, Margaret whispered a quiet promise, to keep passing the torch, lighting the way for generations to come, and never letting the spark of possibility fade. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?